Welcome to Rise and Shine Daily Business Tech Boost with me, Charly Leetham. If you're a small business owner looking to simplify technology and get real, actionable advice from someone with 35 years of IT experience, you're in the right place. Every episode, I'll dive into tools and systems like email, CRM, marketing and tracking, and break them down into bite-sized tips you can use right away. Your time is valuable, so let's get straight to the point. It's time to work smarter, not harder. Rise and shine, it's your daily dose of business tech inspiration with me, Charly Leetham. Episode number 384. Yesterday's episode actually prompted a couple of memories for me, and I thought I might relate them to you and give you some practical examples of how the things that I'm talking about can be put into place and the things that you need to think about. I know when we talk about cybersecurity, it can get dry and dusty and it can seem really scary, or it can just seem onerous with all the things you can do. I thought what I'd do is actually give some practical examples today. This is a number of years ago, and I was talking to one of my friends who worked somewhere. I don't want to say where they worked, but they'd had their security team come through and do an audit. And they had this report of things that they needed to handle from their audit. If you remember, I was talking about we do our threat and risk assessments, and then we get someone to come in, we do an audit, we do a threat and risk assessment, and we look at so let's just start with the threat and risk assessment. And the threat and risk assessment says these are the threats and these are the risks that these threats pose. And then there's a third part of it is the probability of that risk occurring is this. And then we have a fourth part, the impact of that risk is this. Okay, so in this case, it might be the threat is you haven't updated the username and password on your account. So you're using default usernames and passwords on your account. That's your threat. The risk of that is that someone can use that to access your network and create problems within your network. So there's your threat, there's your risk. The probability of that occurring. Now, that might be done as a percentage, and you might just do it as a high, medium, low. I'm going to say that's a high probability. That's one of the first attacks that people try, first vectors of attack that people try when they're trying to get into your network. Have you changed your usernames and passwords? So that's a really high probability of occurring. The impact of that, really high, because someone's going to be able to get in and access your network and access all sorts of things behind the secure access to your network. So that to me would be a level 1 threat that we need to do something with. So I wanted to give that to you as a bit of an example to explain how a threat and risk assessment works. So you get your threat and risk assessment, and it might be pages long. And I mean pages and pages and pages. And some of the things you look at, you think that is so petty. You know what? It might be petty, but it's a really good idea to have it documented and to know that you have actually considered it and considered that it's not really an issue for you, and you've put it aside. You've marked it as this is a risk we're prepared to accept. This is the level of risk we're prepared to accept. But a threat and risk assessment can end up being pages and pages and pages long. Just want to say that. Don't get scared about the fact that it is. Not everything on the threat and risk assessment needs a specific measure against it. What it does need, though, is a specific thought being applied to it to say we are prepared to accept that level of risk or we're not. The next thing we look at is what our mitigations are on that threat and risk assessment. So if we go back to my example here, if you haven't changed your usernames and passwords, the threat of the possibility of that occurring, or the probability of that occurring, is really high. The threat of it occurring, the risk that is associated with that occurring is really high. How do we mitigate it? How do we reduce that level of risk down to something we are prepared to accept? And you'll notice I keep saying risk we are prepared to accept. And the reason I say that is because we will never, ever 100% mitigate our risk. Something will always happen that we never consider, or we haven't thought about, or someone is just a smart bunny and works their way around everything we've put in place. Yeah, I'm going to say never, ever, ever. You'll never get 100% mitigation, but you can get really close. So how do we mitigate that level of risk right down to something that we are prepared to accept? You change your usernames and passwords. What does changing your usernames and passwords do? Well, that takes that probability right down to a really low probability. Someone guessing the risk down to a low level of risk, because the probability, the ability for someone to guess the username and password you've set has been dramatically reduced. So your risk has been reduced. So there's your mitigation strategy. So what I want to do, now that I've given that really long explanation, I want to talk about some of the things that we saw and some of the things that this friend of mine brought to me and said, I don't understand why they're worried about these things. And the stories and the explanations I gave to her at the time. So one of the things was, you haven't changed the default usernames and passwords on your systems. So when you install, for example, if you've installed software and it requires a username and password, typically, well, not so much now. I mean, things are a little different now because this was a number of years ago, but typically when we installed software before, it'd say your default username is this, your default password is this, log in and change it. Now we tend to get prompted, what username do you want, what password do you want, what email address do you want associated with it? But there is still some software that will give you a default username and password. When that happens, you must, absolutely must, get in and change that username and password. What the question that came to me though was, why is this a problem for us? This is sitting on our internal network, and that if that part of the system is only accessible to a certain number of people. We're not going to have people hacking in from outside to get it. My response to that was, you don't know that. You don't know that. This is a chained event type thing. And this is what your auditors are looking at, and this is what your threat and risk creators are looking at. It's like, if someone can get access to this, and maybe that your probability is reduced as a result of it, but if someone can get access to this part of the network, then they can guess that username and password, and now they have the keys to the kingdom for the core of your network. That's a real problem. So you've got to change your usernames and passwords, but you've also got to understand why that's important, because it's not just, well, this is sitting on my internal network, no one's going to get access to it. Well, they might. They absolutely might get access to it, because you've got all these other things that chain up behind it that might give them access to it. It might be that they manage to get one piece of malware onto your site, onto your network, and that then allows them to get that access through. So that was the one thing that I wanted to talk, that I explained to her. The other thing that came out of it was, well, and what happens when you get a disgruntled employee? Now, if you remember in yesterday's episode, I spoke about the water and sewerage employee who was disgruntled and got access to the network remotely and emptied polluted water into the waterways. What happens if that occurs in your business? Now, you've got someone who does have access to that really important core of your network, and they're upset. They may not access it directly themselves, but they may do something to give someone else access to do it. You just don't know. So you've really got to, it's not just looking after yourself from, the external nebulous threats. There can be actual nebulous threats within your network as well, or within your systems as well. So changing the default usernames and passwords is an absolute must, and that's why that's an absolute must. The next one that came up was, you're not removing old employees from your systems. You're leaving their logins, you're leaving access to their email, you're leaving their logins to the personnel systems or to the accounting systems. And, this is a system that is behind multiple levels of firewalls. Again, it's in the core of their network. It's really well protected from the outside. Again, the question was, well, why is this a problem? Well, there's a couple of reasons that I could guess at for it being a problem. I can't speak to the exact mindset of the auditor at the time, but I can give you what I would be thinking if that was me. Firstly, nothing is stopping them getting access remotely and logging into their account. They may have the smarts, or they may have someone who has the smarts that can get them in. And if you've left their username and password on the system, and they get in remotely and they can get into their account, They've got all the access that they had as an employee right there, right at their fingertips. You don't want that to happen. The other thing is that there may be someone internal to your company that, again, disgruntled. They're not happy, or they're not happy that this person was let go, or they're annoyed at how this person was whatever it is. They're working in collusion with this person who has left, and this person says, listen, this is my username and password. See if you can get into my account and what you can find, because there's all this information in there that you want to get hold of. So you could have that partnership of someone working inside and out. Now, how do you mitigate that risk down? Remove their account. Remove their access to the systems. If you can't remove their account because they still own things, and you've got to go through that whole process of changing files over and changing ownership of files, maybe first of all, change their password. That's the first thing I'd be doing, is reset password. They can't get access to it now. They've got an external email or external two-factor authentication set to it. Reset all of that. So it's harder for them to log into the account to begin with, or someone else to log into the account on their behalf. Change the access controls that you give them on the network. So if they were an admin or if they were a manager, reduce them right down to a user so that they can only see certain parts of the system. Really restrict it using your security protocols or your access control protocols. And finally, the final thing that you really should be doing is deleting that account. Get rid of it. Make sure that someone else owns all the files and everything that goes with it, and then delete it. That way you've just removed that possibility of them getting access to that information using their old usernames and passwords. The other one was, you aren't doing your software patches. I have spoken about that a number of times. Why are software patches so important? This is working. We don't want them to break. Yes, but if you're not changing your software, if you're not updating your software, you're not putting in that software, the security updates that go along with it. So you are leaving yourself open. And the longer you leave those software updates, the easier it is for someone to get in and compromise your system, because the patches, that information about what was vulnerable on the system has been out there longer, so people have had longer time to develop hacks to get into the system. Now, there were a few other things, but those were the things that really sort of hit me as the things of, yeah, I can understand why you might not understand why they're important, and I really wanted to bring them to the fore and try to get you thinking in a strategic way about the way you're running your business, the way you're managing the teams, the way you're managing the security of your teams, and why it's important within your business to do this. What do you guys think? Have I prompted some thoughts here? Leave comments wherever you are watching or listening to this video. Come across and join me on my locals community, askcharlyleetham.locals.com. You can send me a DM via any of our social media channels and I'll get to you. I'm a little bit slower on social media than I am on the other channels. If you haven't, or if you could, please like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell. Tomorrow, I'm actually going to talk about, again, just building on from this one, the importance of building a strong cybersecurity culture within your business and how you can get your team members involved in all of this. All right, guys, I will see you all tomorrow. Have a really safe and secure day. Bye. Hey there, thanks so much for tuning in to Rise and Shine, your daily business tech boost. I hope today's episode gave you some actionable insights that will make your business tech work smarter for you. If you found value, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other small business owners who could use a daily boost. For more tips, tools, and resources, visit www.askcharlyleetham.com. Until next time, keep rising, keep shining, and let's make tech simple together.